previous video, I discussed ways of identifying the narcissistic gaze, the focusing of the iris, that which allows one to identify when looking through eye contact, how to identify a narcissist. Now let's identify the empath or the empath, which, yes, it is written differently, but in the pronunciation of empath, it remains towards the pronunciation of empath or empath, which now as an empathetic self, a victim state or a childlike, mindless state, we seek to basically empower those in their victimhood, which as a good friend or any individual that specifically tells you to empower yourself in your victim state, are they truly benefiting your life or prolonging your suffering? Now let's look at the definition of an imp. An imp is a mindless demon. It is a lesser demon, a small demon, which is controlled by a greater evil. Which the greater the evil, the greater the self, the more control it has over the empath, known as the narcissist, seeking prey over the empath or the empath. Both are the same. In the identification of the empath, one must realize that these individuals claim to be good because they are technically innocent or ignorant. They have not gained a perspective which allows them to give you advice. They simply, for lack of better word, tell you to accept your suffering. They don't tell you how to identify the factors that which cause your suffering, which could result in you being able to pull yourself out of your suffering. A great note written by a psychologist known as Carl Jung. This statement changes the empath from here on out, because in this statement, which is, in order to become enlightened, one does not imagine figures of light. In order to become enlightened, one must make the darkness conscious, meaning you have to make it aware. The moment you can make the awareness of the darkness, you enter a reflective state, which what is a narcissist's definition? Someone that is in love with their reflection, which reflection does not specifically relate just to physical reflection as a mirror or image you can see in water, if it is still enough, causing a reflection. A reflection is also the mind's ability to cause you to see a different perspective, which the more you analyze the perspectives of the statements an empath makes, as a narcissist, you begin to now see their downward spiral of low resonance, where they are no longer choosing to rise out of their suffering. They choose to specifically say, this hurts me, 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 to the point they're lost in their suffering. And in being lost in their suffering, they don't know how they themselves can pull out of that suffering, because they are a mindless imp, an empathetic self, which if you break down the word of empathetic, you find there is no I, but an E at the beginning, as we empathetic. The moment you identify the I, you change the definition, which is the moment you see your reflection. I, which what is a narcissist? An individual that has a focused iris, a glare or gaze in their eye, which allows them to see a reflective pattern, which in this reflective pattern of their mind, they're identifying the factors that which affect their own internal suffering and choosing to control those factors in order to prevent themselves from being hurt themselves. It is a protective stance, but it is done through a reflective aggression, which now when you identify an empath and a narcissist, when each of these give you advice, which one is telling you in their statements, this is not the way it should be, and which one in their statements is telling you, this is how you climb out of that. Because unless if a person is able to specifically identify the factors, they're just an empath. A person that can only recognize evil, but cannot see the factors of the evil. They can say, this hurts. They cannot say why this hurts. Which when you have a person such as a psychologist all of a sudden, allow me to put it this way, any good friend can be your psychologist. The question now begs, how good is your psychologist? Because a psychologist is not meant to say, I'm sorry you're suffering. If that is the way a psychologist has their approach towards your treatment, or a friend has their approach towards your suffering of saying, I'm sorry you're going through this pain, they're not offering a statement which a true psychologist is not meant to just let you speak about your pain. You don't pay somebody to listen, just as you don't pay your friends to listen. You pay the psychologist for advice, which a true trained psychologist offers you advice on how to climb out of your pain, how to become better from your pain, how to seek a path beyond the suffering, which keeps you at a empathetic self. The longer you remain empathetic, the longer you remain within your suffering, where you see yourself as a victim in literally everything. Look at society of today, where we have groups of individuals known as empaths, specifically creating revolutions at literally every single suffering. This should not be, this should not be, this should not be, this should not be, this should not be. Okay, if it should not be, offer me a way for it to not be. Don't just point out the problem, offer the solution, which an empath does not have the ability to create a solution. Only a narcissist can identify the factors and then control them in order to prevent the suffering from continuing. That is the difference when you see an empath and a narcissist. A narcissist will always be able to create and control, sorry, let me rephrase that. Not create, but identify the factors which then lead to the creation of a solution through controlling the factors, which results in, once again, climbing out of your suffering. A true psychologist does not listen to the problems of the empath, they offer the solution to the problems of the empath. Which empaths are individuals seeking, they suffer at everything. But in their suffering at everything, they themselves keep themselves within their invisible chain confinements of their cell. The cells of the imp, where the groups or the masses of mindless imps are revolting without having a solution. And how do you create solution? You need to identify the factors. You need to make the factors aware. You need to make the darkness conscious, which the darkness is the patterns, and aware is the perspective that which you can now see yourself climbing or rising above these factors. That is how one achieves enlightenment, where you no longer imagine the enlightenment, you actively shine the enlightenment by making the darkness aware and creating the solution, creating the path for it to rise into light. What is a human? Hue is a measure of light. Man is the self, which we as humans have two personality types. We have the empath, which is a lower state of evil, and now we have the narcissist, a higher state of evil. But in order to climb out of evil, you need to ascend through the evil. You need to rise through the evil in order to achieve the state known as entering heaven, entering goodness. Which in order to enter goodness, you do not just imagine, I'm just going to get there, I won't have to walk the path. In order to make the goodness aware, you make the darkness aware first. Where now you as the individual, you as the empath are faced with the decision to do the work for yourself based on what the greater evil, what the narcissist has given you a perspective to see your problems through and offered you the identification of those factors. So, when looking at empaths, they're simply individuals that are ignorant or innocent. But in the notion that God is not just good, that is a false statement. God is fair, which in fairness, it inquires the notion that one must be just or justice, the smacking of the gavel, which through the gavel, you create the resonance of evil and good, and you separate these two completely the moment you make the decision to say you are innocent or you are guilty. In the guilty, a guilty self knows they are guilty, which in the guilt, why now enter another separation? The guilty that says they are guilty, the guilty that says they are a sinner, and the guilty that says they are innocent. And in the guilty that says they are innocent, they are lying, another sin, which the more you try to pursue in your innocence as a sinner, to lie about your sins, the more evil you commit, the more evil you create in your life, where you no longer have the ability to climb out of that evil you've created for yourself. In order to beat or deconstruct lies, I invite you to speak the truth, which speaking the truth is the ultimate way of combating evil. You do not fight evil by fighting it physically. You combat evil by speaking the truth, which when you look at the idea of exorcism, how does one create an exorcism? Through holy water, which holy water is a still water, allowing reflection. And through the priest's words of the holy water being sprinkled, the exorcist or the priest now speaks the truth, causing the demon to rise out of the person. The ignorant, the lie, the sinner to rise out of the person. And then this beauty is a deep psychology, which is in order to specifically become enlightened, you do not imagine light. In order to become enlightened, you need to make the darkness conscious. You need to make it aware. You need to make it reflect on itself. Which the more darkness reflects on itself, all of a sudden you see it changes into more and more white light. That is a truth. The more you cause darkness to reflect, eventually it turns into grays, and grays turn into white. A different perspective of light. In the beginning there was only darkness. And then God said, "Let there be light." First you must be the darkness before you can achieve the state of light. And light can only speak in a truthful form. Because the moment you lie, you re-enter the darkness, you re-enter your sins, you re-enter your pre-existing patterns, which have made you the empath. In order to rise from the imp into the greater evil, which the greater evil now has a self-redemption possibility because it is aware. And now as a person or awared evil, you now have the ability to reflect and make decisions based on accepting that you are a sinner first, an imperfect self. An imperfect self is an empath, whereas the perfect self, one that is in love with their reflection in a different perspective, becomes what is known as the narcissist, someone that fell in love in their process of reflection. Someone that fell in love with their own reflection because they're continuously reflecting in order to identify the factors that which cause them pain, and they create the solutions in order to rise out of that pain by controlling the factors and no longer engaging in them. Thank you.